You really expect us to pause an IPO over a font mismatch? The compliance chief's voice sliced through the boardroom like a butter knife through canned ham. Come on, this isn't 2004. We've moved on from that kind of old guard paranoia. Laughter broke out, tight, corporate chuckles from people whose mortgages depended on pretending this kid in the $2,000 suit knew what the hell he was doing. I just stared at the conference table. My report, 37 pages, annotated, cross-referenced, triple-checked, sat untouched in front of half the board. A few hadn't even opened the folder. One guy was scrolling through LinkedIn on his tablet, nodding like he was listening. Across from me, Tyler Manning, the new chief compliance officer, handpicked straight from some senator's intern pool, leaned back in his chair and smirked like he'd just solved global warming by switching to almond milk. Seriously, guys. If we let risk reports like this hold us back, we'll never IPO. The market doesn't reward fear, it rewards innovation. The chairman nodded. Well said, Tyler. Let's not waste time on legacy procedures. Legacy procedures. That's what they called the data architecture I spent a decade building to keep this company from getting its ass handed to it by regulators. Legacy is what they call a seatbelt when the new guy wants to drive straight into a wall because airbags are cool now. I cleared my throat. My voice didn't crack, but it was close. Section 12.2 of our compliance framework, written and approved by legal, finance, and external audit, mandates a full review of document integrity in all disclosed datasets prior to a public offering. That font mismatch? It means the Q2 report was retroactively edited. That's a red flag for. Tyler raised his hand like I was a kindergartner asking too many questions during nap time. We've already checked it with the new software suite. Everything's fine. And even if it was edited, which it wasn't, it was to correct a typo. Calm down. Who corrected it? Silence. I let it hang there. No one answered. Because no one knew. And that was the damn point. I looked around the room. No one met my eyes. Not the CFO. Not the chairman. Not Janice from legal, who used to call me at 11 p.m. in a panic about metadata discrepancies before quarterly audits. I wasn't a colleague anymore. I was a delay. An inconvenience. A box to uncheck. Tyler smiled wider. Look, no offense, but some of us are trying to get this company to the next level. We appreciate your service, really, but we're streamlining. We don't need to over-engineer the wheel. That got another round of chuckles. Someone muttered something about boomer paranoia. I'm 49. I nodded slowly. Shut the folder in front of me. Didn't bother picking up the stack of exhibits I'd prepared. I didn't look at anyone when I stood up. But I did say one thing before I walked out. Server 7. If you touch it, make damn sure you know what you're deleting. Tyler raised an eyebrow. We've already migrated everything to cloud storage. We're not in the Stone Age. I didn't reply. Just walked. Down the hall. Past the marble reception desk they installed last quarter to elevate the brand. Past the framed Fast Company article with Tyler's smug face on it, holding a reusable coffee cup and talking about reinventing enterprise ethics. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears. Not just anger, betrayal. I'd trained 2 of those directors myself when they first joined. Built this company's compliance backbone from scratch, while Tyler was still learning how to write a cover letter. And now I was a punchline. A cautionary tale about what happens when you care too much about the rules. Outside, the sky was that weird gray-yellow color that shows up before a thunderstorm. I lit a cigarette for the first time in 12 years. My hands were shaking so hard I damn near lit my eyebrow on fire. Legacy. Funny word, that. Usually gets brought up at funerals. And right then, I knew something they didn't. This wasn't my funeral that I didn't even go back to my office. Just walked straight to HR with the smell of Tyler's smugness still stinging my nose. The receptionist, Melissa, blinked like I'd walked in with a shotgun. Hey, Mr. Caldwell. Everything okay? I handed her my badge. She blinked again. Effective immediately, I said, my voice low and flat. You'll find the resignation letter on my shared drive. Folders labeled good luck. She opened her mouth to say something. I could see the confusion, the need to ask if I was joking, if this was part of some dramatic negotiation tactic. But I was done. Not just with the job. With the whole damn performance. The meetings. The jargon. The hollow nods from execs pretending they understood the systems we built to keep their names out of prison. I walked past the floor-to-ceiling values wall near the elevators. 5 words etched in steel: integrity, innovation, agility, trust, transparency. Should have carved them into a urinal. At least then someone might have looked at them every day. When the elevator doors closed, I finally exhaled. Shame boiled under my skin, thick and metallic. I'd been loyal. Not stupidly loyal. I'm no martyr. But committed. I'd gone blind from screen fatigue building those audit trails. Stayed up nights drafting policy so airtight a cockroach couldn't sneak through without triggering a federal compliance notice. And all it took was one suit with a politician's jawline and a podcast mic to erase it. Well, try to erase it. Because here's the thing. I wrote the data policy. All of it. Not just the sanitized SOP the board sees once a quarter. I mean the original architecture. The backup matrix. The revision control protocols. The risk flags. The biometric override exceptions. Hell, I even coded the goddamn redundancy map myself when we couldn't get funding to hire another sysadmin. And buried in that matrix, nestled like a loaded mousetrap in an empty pantry, was a little clause under section 12.2.4.3. Server 7 shall house an immutable, time-stamped, air-gapped repository of compliance-sensitive disclosures. Deletion shall require a 3-party confirmation: legal, audit, and executive. 3-party, which they never got. Because legal never even saw Server 7. You know why? Because only 2 people ever accessed it. Me, and a failsafe script that ran once a week on a power cycle that didn't show up on Tyler's pretty little dashboard. It didn't run on the cloud. It didn't live on the flashy AWS node the CTO liked to brag about at investor conferences. It sat behind a reinforced panel in a climate-controlled subroom nobody, but facilities even remembered existed. The same room I personally relabeled janitorial storage, paint supplies 6 years ago. So yeah, I walked out of that building with shame clinging to me like diesel stink. But under it, deeper, quieter, there was something else. A certainty. They'd just ripped out the last working airbag from a car they were planning to launch off a cliff. And they were too drunk on buzzwords to notice the smell of burning brakes. In the parking garage, I passed Tyler's car, a leased Audi with plates that said Ethics 1. I smiled. If he ever dug far enough, he might find the right command to open the gateway to Server 7. But that would mean he read the policy. And reading, as we both knew, was for the paranoid point. 2 weeks after I walked out, I found Tyler's face staring at me from a CNBC autoplay video while I was trying to read the damn weather. That perfect jawline grinning like he invented integrity. Lower third read. Youngest compliance chief in sector prepares flagship IPO. I didn't click play. I didn't need to. I could already hear the words. Streamlined risk architecture. Legacy-free compliance. We've modernized internal oversight with a cloud-native mindset. A cloud-native mindset. Jesus wept. My phone buzzed. My buddy Ron from accounting had texted me a screenshot of Forbes' online cover story. Tyler again, holding a laptop like he knew how to use it. The title? The New Guard, Disrupting Governance Before 30. Ron's message below it. Tell me this is a joke. They quoted your retention clause as his innovation. I laughed hard enough I choked on my coffee. Because that's exactly what was happening. Every control I wrote, every safeguard I built, every buried tripwire wrapped in procedural language, so dry it could powder drywall. He was repackaging it in Gen Z TED Talk bullshit and calling it revolutionary. Investors were eating it up. The IPO was on track to launch within 60 days. They'd shaved 6 months off the original schedule. All thanks to lean compliance and AI-enabled risk scoring. Whatever the hell that meant. I sat at my kitchen table, in sweatpants and a hoodie with a rip under the armpit, reading news articles quoting people I trained about systems they barely understood. They talked about agility. Tyler called the old compliance model too dense for the modern investor. Said he'd made the complex simple. Yeah, by deleting half of it. There was something almost poetic about it, watching them sprint toward a finish line with their shoes untied, and no idea they were running on a frozen lake. I'd done what I could. Years ago, I realized that systems only survive if they can withstand arrogance. It wasn't enough to be secure, it had to be idiot-proof. Resistant to short-sighted egos in $3,000 suits who think PowerPoint counts as due diligence. So I'd written my safeguards to be self-enforcing. Slow to trigger. Easy to overlook. But absolute once violated. The media didn't know that, of course. Neither did the shareholders. All they saw was a rocket ship. I saw a time bomb in a tuxedo. That week, the company made the front page of the journal. Phrases like explosive growth, next-gen governance, IPO darling peppered the piece. Tyler got quoted again. Something about embracing risk as a feature, not a flaw. I nearly spit out my bourbon. But the part that really got me? A pull quote at the top of the article, printed in bold. There's nothing to fear when you've deleted the past. I stared at those words for a long time, because I remembered the last time I heard something like that. It was in a meeting, years ago, back when we were still building out the compliance tree. A junior exec wanted to remove the audit history logs to make the interface cleaner. You can't fix what you can't see, I told him. And you can't see what doesn't exist. Tyler must have been listening back then. But not to me. To the exec who got fired 6 months later for falsifying vendor reports. And now here he was, on TV, in print, on podcasts, talking like the laws of digital evidence didn't apply if you just believed hard enough in disruption. I didn't rage. Didn't scream. Didn't type some anonymous LinkedIn post about toxic leadership. I just leaned back in my chair, opened a folder on my private backup drive, and scrolled until I found it. Server 7_archive trigger.exe. Last modified, 16 months ago. Status dormant. It didn't destroy anything. It didn't leak. It didn't hack. It didn't sabotage. It just recorded. Immutable. Timestamped. Redundant. And it was sitting there, quietly, waiting for a subpoena. I closed the folder and took a sip of bourbon. Let them IPO. Let them race. They were the ones who pulled out the brakes. I just built the hill. The first crack didn't come with a bang. It came with a politely worded email from the SEC. A routine pre-IPO request. Standard checklist. No cause for alarm. Except anyone who's been in the game long enough knows the phrase routine inquiry from the SEC is like hearing a rattlesnake say hello. It means someone's sniffing. And when they sniff, it's not for fun. They wanted 5 things. Historical financial statements, audited. Insider trading declarations. Current compliance framework. Offsite data retention logs. A full copy of the mandatory disclosure backup, as per internal policy. Item 5. That was the quiet gunshot. Because that request? That wasn't random. That was someone at the SEC doing their homework. Someone who dug into our filings deep enough to find the dusty corner of the data policy that every exec skipped over like it was the terms and conditions on a software update. Section 12.2, subsection 4.3. Retention of immutable compliance-related documentation must be verifiable on at least one independent, non-cloud, offsite system. Shall be retrievable within 72 hours upon regulatory request. Translation? They wanted the Server 7 backup. And they gave them 3 days to cough it up. Of course, I wasn't in the building anymore. But I didn't have to be. Word travels fast when panic hits. Especially when no one knows where the hell Server 7 even is. Tyler and his streamlined compliance team started clawing through their new systems like rats in a grain silo. They sent panicked requests to IT, legal, even facilities, asking if anyone had ever heard of an offsite archive server. One IT guy I used to mentor, Julian, texted me at midnight. Hey man, did we ever actually have a Server 7? Or was that just a test instance or something? I stared at that message for a long moment, then typed back. It's in the policy. No reply. Meanwhile, the board released a statement to shareholders. All regulatory requests are being addressed promptly. The company's data infrastructure is state-of-the-art and fully compliant with SEC standards. Which was hilarious, considering Tyler's entire model of modernization boiled down to delete old systems, replace them with a prettier dashboard, assume that counts as progress. The truth? Server 7 had been air-gapped for years. Not because I didn't trust the cloud. Hell, I helped design half of their Azure protocols. But because regulatory compliance isn't about trust. It's about proof. About showing that the digital paper trail can't be tampered with. That's why I'd tucked it in an off-site storage room, behind a false utility panel. No network access. No remote wipe. No autodeletion. Just a rotating log of every version of every mandatory disclosure packet from the last 6 years. Ironclad. Signed. Sealed. And now they needed it. And they didn't have it. I could picture it. Tyler pacing his office, sleeves rolled up like he was actually going to touch a server himself, barking half-understood buzzwords at engineers who were too afraid to admit they had no idea what he was talking about. They thought this was a bump. I knew better. This was the part of the movie where the villain starts to sweat, right before they realize the hero planted the bomb in their briefcase 3 acts ago. Because this wasn't sabotage. This wasn't revenge. This was gravity. And gravity don't care how fast you think you're moving. Only how hard you're about to hit. 3 weeks before I left, back when I still bothered showing up to Friday culture sinks, Tyler strolled into the break room with that same cocky swagger like he'd just discovered fire and couldn't wait to monetize the smoke. "Guess what I did today?" he said, grabbing a kombucha from the fridge like a frat boy grabbing a beer before a shotgun contest. I didn't answer. Just kept stirring powdered creamer into my coffee, like the taste of mediocrity might somehow drown the sound of him talking. "Cleaned out a ton of ancient junk," he said, popping the cap. "Servers that haven't been touched in years. Total boneyard crap. You should have seen it. Half the stuff wasn't even labeled properly. Just cables and dust and like one machine that looked like it came out of Fallout." I didn't say anything, but I remember the knot in my gut tightening. "What rack?" I asked, without looking up. He laughed. "Shit, I dunno. Some off-site storage unit over in Franklin. Took the interns an hour just to get inside. Real Crypt Keeper vibes. We shut it all down. Wiped the drives. Told facilities to repurpose the space." The spoon froze in my hand. Franklin. That was it. That was the location. The one nobody outside a 5-person window even knew existed. The place I personally installed, because I didn't trust the idea of critical backups existing only in places Tyler's password could reach. Server 7. He'd deleted it. Bragged about it. Wiped the one system, the only system, mandated in the clause he never even read. The clause I wrote in a sweatbox apartment with a portable AC unit and a mountain of audit reports in 2017, after watching another company eat a $19 million fine for data misplacement. I remember that moment clearly. The cheap lights humming. The sound of the vending machine coughing behind him. The interns laughing like hyenas in the hallway about old tech. And Tyler, holding court like a preacher selling salvation in exchange for a few more percentage points on his bonus. I didn't argue. I didn't even blink. Because in that instant, I understood something. I was free. See, most people think revenge is something you have to do. A plan. A plot. A final act of glorious retribution. But sometimes revenge just happens when arrogance meets architecture. Server 7 wasn't built to embarrass anyone. It wasn't a trap. It was insurance, written in blood, sweat, and 6-hour audit calls. It existed because I knew. One day someone like Tyler would come along and say, "What's this dusty old box doing here?" Right before lighting the fuse. And now here we were. He thought he was cleaning house. What he did was shred the parachute before the plane even took off. The best part? The logs. Oh, the beautiful, time-stamped logs. Every access. Every query. Every shutdown. Including his. So when the SEC asked where the backup was, and legal asked IT if they could recover the records, they'd find one name in the deletion certificate. Tyler J. Manning. Authorized by no one. Confirmed by no one. And filed without audit oversight, violating not just internal policy, but 2 federal standards and one very important bullet point on their S-1 registration. I sat on my porch that evening, a little breeze rolling in, the last light of the day turning the trees gold. I didn't smile, didn't toast the gods of karma. I just watched the sun go down and thought, "You did this, Tyler." Not me. I just built the damn window. You were the one who jumped through it. They showed up on a Tuesday. Of course they did. SEC never does Mondays, too obvious. And never Fridays, too kind. Two agents, gray suits, no smiles. The kind of presence that doesn't raise their voice because they don't have to. They just walk in, flash badges, and let the silence do the rest. They were escorted into the 12th floor glass conference room around 9:43 a.m. According to the internal timestamp someone leaked later. No fuss. No press. Just two government hounds with a printed checklist, and the eyes of people who've seen behind too many curtains. Word spread like bleach in a waterline. By 10:15, legal had convened an emergency coffee huddle. By 10:22, the CFO canceled a golf trip. By 10:35, the air smelled like toner and fear. Tyler, of course, tried to manage the situation like it was a podcast appearance. Calm hand gestures, tight smiles, lots of buzzwords. But the lead investigator was old school. He didn't blink at the confidence. He just asked one question. We'd like the immutable compliance backup per section 12.2, specifically the one maintained on what your documentation refers to as Server 7. That's it. That was the detonation. Tyler froze for half a breath too long. Tried to pivot. Right, of course. So, Server 7, I believe that's been migrated. We're fully cloud-based now, so any files you're looking for would definitely be retrievable from our primary node. The investigator raised an eyebrow, slow and deliberate. We'd still like the original, unaltered copy. Offsite. Non cloud. Server 7. Tyler laughed. And that was his mistake. Because you don't laugh in front of the SEC. You don't spin. You don't charm. You answer. You comply. Or they stay. He started stammering about digitization and streamlining legacy architecture, about how certain redundancies had been removed for efficiency, about how they'd cleaned up infrastructure. They let him speak. Let him twist. At 11:03 a.m., I got a text from Julian, the same IT guy who messaged me about Server 7 weeks earlier. They're here. SEC. Asking about your server. My thumb hovered over the screen for a second before I replied. Tell them to check the facility's decommission log. Franklin site. March 3rd. Because here's the thing about government investigators. They don't get mad when you screw up. They get quiet. And when the SEC gets quiet, your IPO window starts shrinking like a raisin in a sauna. By noon, Tyler had sent 4 different engineers to try to locate alternate backups. They scrubbed every cloud node, every Google Vault archive, every SharePoint instance like they were defusing a bomb they'd already swallowed. Nothing. Because Server 7 didn't have a backup. It was the backup. That was the whole point. Air-gapped. Physically isolated. Designed to sit outside the daisy chain of corporate recklessness and be activated only when federal eyes came sniffing, which they now were. I imagine the moment they realized it was gone. The way Tyler's face must have dropped when someone from IT whispered, it was wiped. Decommissioned. No archive found. I imagine the way the SEC agents looked at each other, then slowly packed their folders. Not because the interview was over, but because the real work was just beginning. Subpoenas. Forensic audits. Suspension of IPO activity pending review. You could probably hear the collective sphincter of the board tighten from across state lines. Me? I was watching a live stream of a raccoon eating Cheetos in someone's backyard when Julian texted again. Tyler just left the room. He looks wrecked. I didn't smile. Didn't gloat. I just leaned back, took a long sip of black coffee and whispered. The trap wasn't sprung. He walked right into it, whistling. The next 72 hours inside that building must have felt like a hostage situation with a timer taped to a bag of wet dynamite. By Wednesday morning, internal meeting logs showed Tyler had booked himself into 8 emergency syncs before lunch. Legal, board, audit, investor relations, even facilities. One of them lasted all of 9 minutes. That's how long it took for Janice from legal to snap. If you don't have the files, stop pretending you might. The man who once told the board that compliance is a mindset, not a paper trail, was now drowning in a paper trail with his name on every page. And the paper? Missing. The board was furious. IPO partners had already advanced press materials, teaser decks, equity modeling. Millions, tens of millions, had been poured into prep. Investor confidence was the whole game. And now, confidence was leaking like radiator fluid in July. I heard from someone in finance that one of the board members threatened litigation in the middle of a call. Another one allegedly said, "I don't care if we have to resurrect the old compliance guy, find that file." Ah yes, the old compliance guy. I was sitting at home, barefoot, dipping day-old pizza in ranch, watching it all play out in frantic Slack leaks and panicked texts. Julian again. Tyler just asked if anyone remembers who signed off on the legacy policy. I typed back, "Tell him to check the authorship line on page 1. Because he never read it. None of them did. But if he had, he'd have seen it. My name, etched right there in black ink under primary architect. Dated, notarized, legally binding. And right below that, the section that spelled it all out. No deletion of server May 7th occur without tripartite authorization. Legal, audit, executive. He had none. He didn't even ask. He just deleted it, wiped it like an old download folder full of expired memes. And now he was sitting in front of board members with net worths higher than the GDP of some countries, trying to convince them that somewhere, somehow, this was just a misunderstanding. Except it wasn't. It was policy. My policy. He laughed at it. Scoffed. Called it paranoia. Now the feds wanted proof of that very paranoia. Poetic in a way. You spend your life writing fire drills into the walls, hoping no one ever needs them. And then the guy who mocks the sprinkler system sets the curtains on fire and wonders why everything smells like smoke. Ron, the accountant turned inside man, messaged me midday. "They're unraveling. CEO looks like he aged 5 years overnight. One of the VCs just pulled out of the round." Another message 5 hours later. Someone asked Tyler if he had any personal liability. He went pale. I bet he did. Because while I didn't engineer their collapse, I also didn't stop it. That's the thing about policy, it's not a seatbelt. It's a detonator if you ignore it. The IPO clock was ticking. The SEC had gone quiet. No more emails. No more calls. Just silence. The kind of silence you hear right before they drop the hammer. I looked out my window as dusk settled in, phone glowing with chaos I didn't cause. And I thought, I built them a bunker. He turned it into a sandbox. Now the tide was coming. By the end of the week, they stopped pretending it was a hiccup. The press release hit early Friday morning. Quiet, buried under fluff stories and AI-generated think pieces. Company postpones IPO amid regulatory review. Not cancelled. Not dead. Just postponed. Like a funeral that hasn't been scheduled yet because the body's still twitching. But anyone in the game knew what it meant. You miss your window in this market? You don't get a second one. Not unless you're Apple. Not unless you're clean. And they weren't. Investors started peeling off like paint in a fire. One of the lead underwriters pulled out completely. A second firm reevaluated their risk posture. The internal valuation, once pegged at $1.4 billion, bled nearly $500 million overnight. And the SEC? Oh, they came back. Not with questions this time, but with subpoenas. Broader scope. Deeper teeth. Words like disclosure inconsistency and willful misrepresentation floated through the financial press like blood in the water. That's when Tyler vanished from the website. No more smug quotes. No more guest appearances on fintech panels. No more ethics-forward compliance bullshit. The company line was that he had resigned to pursue other opportunities. Translation. He got thrown under the nearest bus, and the board made sure it had snow chains on. Word trickled out, first through hushed Slack threads, then louder, about how it all led back to one fatal decision. The deletion of a single server. The ghost of Server 7 haunted every closed-door meeting, every strategy huddle, every conversation with lawyers who charged $1,200 an hour to say this is bad. And somewhere in that storm, my name started popping up. Not in headlines. Not officially. Just whispered. The old guy warned us. Didn't he write that clause? I think he was the one who insisted on the offsite. I got a message from someone in legal, anonymous account, no name. You were right. About everything. I just wanted you to know. I didn't reply. Didn't need to. Because that wasn't why I built it. That wasn't why I stayed late for 10 years while the rest of them went home to rooftop drinks and LinkedIn humble brags. I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because if you're going to build the brakes, you'd better make damn sure they work even when the driver's drunk on their own ambition. And now, the brakes worked. Too late. Too hard. But they worked. I didn't feel joy. No tumping pride. No smug grin while the house collapsed under its own arrogance. What I felt was release. Like I'd been holding my breath since the day I walked out of that boardroom with Tyler's laughter echoing in my ears. I'd watched them torch the safety net, sell the ashes, and call it innovation. And now I was watching the fire finally run out of oxygen. No champagne. No vengeance dance. Just the quiet hum of a life no longer tangled in theirs. I went out for a walk that night. Cool air, no agenda, no phone. Somewhere, a siren wailed in the distance. I smiled. Not because they'd lost, but because I finally didn't have to carry the weight of keeping them from losing. They did that all by themselves. It was a Tuesday when the final nail dropped. I was sitting in a cafe that served burnt espresso with the confidence of a Parisian bistro. Same wobbly table I used to work from on weekends back, when I still believed in pulling long hours to keep people like Tyler out of trouble they didn't even know they were walking into. I wasn't checking stock tickers or earnings calls. I'd stopped doing that weeks ago. But the headline caught my eye anyway. Half buried on a financial blog I used to trust before everyone started using ChatGPT to write thought leadership posts. IPO conseil d'amis d'expanding ses probes. Compliance chief resigns. That was it. No fanfare. No dramatique exposé. Just a flat declaration of corporate death by hubris. I scrolled through the article. Quotes from anonymous insiders, watered-down PR statements, one photo of Tyler outside a courthouse, sunglasses on, lips pressed into the kind of smirk you wear when you think you still might land on your feet. The piece ended with the same kind of detached language they always used to cushion failure. The company remains committed to transparency and plans to revisit a public offering once regulatory concerns are resolved. Which, in corporate speak, translates to, "We're bleeding out slowly, but let's pretend we're not." I closed the article, pulled out the worn leather binder from my bag, and let it fall open naturally, like muscle memory. Section 12.2.4.3. I'd highlighted it and read the night I finalized the document. I remember doing it while eating instant noodles and listening to a thunderstorm outside my window. The words stared up at me now. Common final. Mandatory preservation of all compliance files on server 7. Air-gapped. Unalterable. Destruction without tri-party authorization constitutes breach of fiduciary and legal duty. Tyler never saw it. He signed the updated policy without reading. Probably too busy practicing TED Talk lines in the mirror. And that was the irony, wasn't it? He thought deleting a server made a problem disappear. But deletion is never the end. It's just a breadcrumb. A gap in the chain. A shadow that someone somewhere always notices. He wasn't brought down by sabotage. He was brought down by procedure. By protocol. By the one thing men like him always forget until it's too late. Paper remembers. I sipped my burnt coffee, the bitterness anchoring me. No one would thank me. No one would throw a parade. The company would survive, probably rebrand, shuffle the board, slap on a new coat of paint and call it leaner. Tyler would land some advisory gig through his dad's network. Investors would move on. But the moment was mine. Quiet. Complete. They'd laughed when I warned them. Mocked my caution. Called it fear. Now the feds were quoting the exact policies they once ignored. And me? I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even smug. I was still at peace, in a way I hadn't been in years. Because in the end, I didn't need to destroy them. I just needed to walk away and let gravity handle the rest. I flipped the binder shut and whispered the truth one last time. Just loud enough for myself. I didn't delete anything. I just wrote the rules. He was the one who broke them.